Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Compound Performance Group Mentorship. Today, we're going to discuss strengths analysis. And it's going to be fairly short, but it is something that we like to cover every group. And obviously, this round, we've made it one of our pre recorded materials. So you can kind of watch it at your own time, take a little bit of time to kind of analyze again, maybe what your strengths and limitations are individually and how we might be able to mitigate those things to better service your clients. So, jumping into it, right, we want to talk a little bit about what exactly are your personal strengths, right? And how do you decide what these personal strengths are? Are you going to get the information from other people? Are you going to go to peers? Are you going to go to the people that may know you best? Are you going to objectively and realistically look at your own skill set and identify what you do really well and then own up to it, right? Again, a lot of the people that we work with, they have a hard time actually identifying the things that they do really well. You know, maybe in a lot of cases they're a little too humble when it comes to this, and maybe they even get a little shy or anxious when trying to talk about the things that they do really well. Um, but at the same time, they're often really quick to point out the things that they don't do well, right? So that might sound familiar to you, right? Where we can pick apart the things that we need to improve, right? uh, Especially within our own perception, and part of that again is really just even a survival mechanism, right? Like we're very quick to identify things that are negative and very quick to overlook things that are positive, and that's an evolutionary mechanism that's kept humans alive for a long, long time. But for this exercise, I want to make sure that we're also really identifying the things that we do well, because for us to be able to help the people that we're working with in the best way possible and to progress our business to its utmost potential, we need to be able to start leveraging these attributes and traits as much as possible, right? And I guess the question there is, how do we know when we've reached uh, leveraging these things as far as they can really be pushed? And typically, what we see here is that at some point we start getting to a point of diminishing returns, right? Where the energy that goes into promoting and leveraging these strengths um, starts, kind of over referencing the inputs or the outputs that we're getting out of the strengths, right? So, and that's where maybe at that point we need to look at our environment or look at maybe other traits that we might need to bring up and start filling up the gaps with, and those would be like some of our potentially like perceived limitations, right? So we'll talk about those in a little bit. But what we start looking at is, basically the concept of specificity and variability. And when I talk about specificity and variability, I want to also make sure that we understand that everything is actually specificity, right? If we're trying to train or improve on a quality, we are doing that through specificity, even if the goal output is variability, right? Because typically the point of training for variability is bringing up qualities that you're not necessarily as good at, and again, while doing that, kind of foregoing the things that you already do well, right? And typically what we look at here is, specificity always has a cost, right? So typically improving one area will kind of diminish the quality of the other area or other areas because of energy expenditure and time expenditure that is going to be used to doing that and pursuing that thing. And what we look at is the ROI worth the diminishing returns on those other areas if we're looking or seeking out, global variability? And typically, again, it's a continuum. It's not all or nothing. So we can find a sweet spot where we can pursue either driving our strengths to further optimization or bringing up some of these limitations to fill in gaps. We can pursue these things without truly reaching a point of sustained diminished return in the other areas, right? We might drop them a little bit, but we're not going to drop them forever, and it might not even be noticeable. We can look at this from a training perspective by identifying outputs and inputs too, right? So if we're looking at categories of maximal strength and cardiovascular efficiency and maybe movement competency or mobility, if we're looking at these categories, we're never going to be fully optimized in all three at the same time, because a lot of these things have inverse relationships built into them, right? Like if you're going to be maximally strong, you're probably not going to have a lot of movement variability or movement options going into that as well. You're going to be very specific in the patterns that you're using. If we look at like a power lifter, for instance, they are maximally strong, but in order to get that strong, we actually decrease movement competency and movement variability in the frontal and transverse planes, right? Because we don't want rotation or lateralization of a skeleton, for instance. We want vertical up and down, and that's it when we start looking at the squat, the bench, and the deadlift. Now, if I'm looking at a marathon runner and I'm looking at optimized cardiovascular efficiency as well, I'm probably not going to have maximal strength, right? Because I also want to be lightweight. I don't want a lot of tissue and a lot of mass. And I want a little bit more movement competency because I have to go through gait cycles and I have to be able to pronate and supinate. I have to be able to internally and externally rotate a femur, internally and externally rotate a pelvis, and then also look at like the thorax rotating on the femurs and the pelvis as well, right? So I have to be able to move and rotate and work more into that triplanar into those triplanar patterns. So I need more movement options for that. And if I want to be as maximally flexible as possible, again, the time that it takes to dedicate to that area is probably going to take away from both maximal strength and maximal cardiorespiratory efficiency, right? So again, the further we dive down any given hole, the more specific we become, the less we're going to be able to optimize other qualities. And we just have to decide as individuals, is it worth it? And I think that's what I want you guys to kind of decide as we're going through this exercise on your case study, right? So this is going to be something that we're going to be covering a little bit in the upcoming weeks too. So again, once we identify these strengths, now we have to look at how are we actually using these to improve our service and business? Better question, are we using these? Right? Are we leveraging these? Are we being authentic to ourselves? Or are we trying to be somebody else? Right? Are we looking at influencers on social media or maybe other people within our gym who are successful and trying to change our strengths and mimic theirs? Because if we are, you might find some short-term gain in that, but people see through it really quickly. And you're also going to attract a lot of people that maybe aren't a good match for your skill set over time, right? And authenticity will almost always win out in these scenarios. So find your strengths, embrace being different from other people, even if it is a niche, and then just drive the crap out of it. Be authentic within that, and you will attract people who are drawn to your skill set and your personality traits and some of these characteristics and qualities. And you're going to have a much better business because of that, because you're going to have better relationships with the people you're working with, right? So looking now at the other end of the spectrum, right? And we look at perceived limitations, and this is where people usually get stuck, where they start identifying all the things that they're not good at in their own eyes, right? In their own perception. And if I'm going to make a list of the things I'm really good at versus the things that I'm not very good at, I know which list is typically longer, right? In my eyes, right? Like that list of things where I'm not meeting my potential or I'm not optimizing these things or I'm just not good at them at all, right? Like that's usually a very long list if I'm going to go, sit down and write it out. What we found though, and what I found in my experience is a lot of the things that I'm not good at aren't required for my professional or personal success in any way. And they're not even important. And they're actually time wasters if I'm going to dedicate, the time and energy to try and improve them, right? So we also have to be super objective when looking at our limitations and identifying is the juice worth the squeeze, so to speak? Is the ROI worth the investment of time and energy to improve these things, or are they just being improved to be improved, right? And if they are needing to be improved and it's worth it, how do we go about that process? Are they learned? Can I get this through education, or are they practiced? Do I need to get this through experience, right? Because you can't teach somebody experience and you can't experience education and gain knowledge from a source with no information there. So what we're looking at then is, are you seeking out the right sources to actually improve these qualities? You have to think about that, right? So for most of us, this is probably where the most opportunity for progress is, right? So stress and adaptation, right? We're going to talk a little bit about autonomics, but we're going to talk about autonomics in much greater detail here in a few weeks as we start beginning our curriculum. So when we start looking at stress and adaptation, nothing adapts and changes and progresses within an environment without stress, right? So if we want to truly improve, we have to push ourselves, right? Because our body is constantly seeking out homeostasis, right? So it's going to conserve energy at all costs if left by itself, right? So we have to input stress to create adaptation, because our bodies or our brains or our knowledge base, whatever, no environments and nothing within an environment adapts without pressure, without a stimulus, without stress, right? So disruption from normal patterns is what typically produces the most change in any environment. And we can typically learn more from our mistakes than our successes, right? Success can be random, and success can also provide a false positive, right? Where we might have succeeded, but to what extent? Could we have done better with another strategy? Or was the other, what we were competing against, or the standardization we were trying to overcome, was it just too low, right? Did we really win, or did somebody else lose? These are things that we have to think about. So this comes into the conversation of, are we seeking growth or are we seeking validation? Because growth comes through failures oftentimes, right? That's where we actually learn things. We learn things that don't work, and we have to create corollaries and different strategies to try to overcome some of that stressor so we can get a positive outcome. Versus validation, that's kind of playing it safe, right? And you typically looking at your peer group or even yourself, just validating those decisions because it fits our bias or a certain narrative. And that's usually, again, it feels good, but it doesn't actually lead to much, right? From a growth perspective. And I think that's always an important delineation to make as we start talking about limitations and strengths. And now, as we're kind of getting into this and, discussing these things, we want to make sure that you're actually leveraging these things well, right? And identifying the traits and experiences that set you apart from your peers, right? Whether that's online or whether that's within a facility or both. We have to figure out what is authentically you. What are you good at that nobody else is good at, or you're better at than your competitors, or you can relate to with a certain demographic? What is your in? What is that sticking point? How do you create a niche for yourself and differentiate yourself from the million other trainers that are in the US? Probably actually way more than that. The last census I saw just for New York alone, Manhattan, was 60,000 plus certified personal trainers. So probably about 100,000 people actually calling themselves trainers in that one market, right? So if we look across the entire US, you might have millions of competitors. And that's where we live from a remote standpoint when we're on, social media and whatnot. So again, how do you differentiate yourself from all these other people, and how do you appeal to the demographic that you're looking to train? Do you know who that demographic is, right? That's going to be something we also discuss, because that's going to be super important. Can we actually identify what these individual strengths are, and are they advantageous? Can we identify what our limitations are, and do they even need to be addressed? Are they actually limiting us, right? Perception versus reality. Are we just hyper conscious of these things, or do we actually have data and feedback that tells us that we need to improve them? And then how do we actually appropriately brand ourselves based on the things that we do well, right? So this again leads into appealing to your actually niche, so that we know the branding aspect matters and is reaching the right people, and people that might actually feel like investing or be prompted to invest in your business, people that you can actually help. These are super important things, and things that we'll go into again in more depth in other weeks, but things that we want to make sure that you're aware of, heading into this program, because these are things we're going to talk about, right? So as we get into this, and as we start bringing this little short exercise together. Well, what I would like you to do, is as we're getting ready for week one of this curriculum and this program, can you start thinking about what your strengths and what your perceived limitations are? Can you start identifying the things that you do really well and the things that set you apart from competitors, the things that will attract clientele to you individually? And then how can you be authentic to those things in your messaging, right? Whether you're on a training floor within a facility and you're talking to people in person, or whether you're online and you're creating content that's directed at a certain group or a certain demographic. Who is that client archetype? And are you actually reaching them with information that can help them and things that, again, they will value within their own interests? Do your values match? Are you being authentic to your strengths? Are you personifying those strengths? And are you communicating those strengths to the right people so that they have a better understanding of who you are, what you do, and why they need you as a coach? This is important, right? This is marketing, but it's also just how you brand yourself and how you build your own business. And at the end of the day, how you can help the most amount of people. Marketing, branding, and business they're not bad words, right? These are ways for you to get in front of the most amount of people possible and to be able to reach the most amount of people possible to help them, right? As a coach, right? And then as we start looking at these limitations on the other end of the spectrum, all these things that you've listed, can we identify how they're actually limiting you or if they are limiting you? And if they are limiting you, how can we progress these? Is it through education or is it through experience? Do we need to take more seminars, more certifications, more coursework, learn new information? Or do we need to get better at applying the information that we already have, right? I've got my ideas. We're going to talk a lot about this, but in my experience with a lot of coaches, both in management and development, a lot of coaches already have the necessary information to help people. What they lack is the experience in applying that to different contexts, to different clients, right? So again, experience is huge. And this is something that we need to be able to collect and identify and make sure it's valuable and quality experience as well. When you're on the floor and you're coaching your clients or you're writing programs or you're doing feedbacks and communicating with the people that you work with, are you invested in every part of that process? Are you engaged in every part of that process? Are you building on your experience every day as you're coaching? These are the things that are going to move you forward, right? And so that's going to be part of your homework as we start moving into week one. What I would like for you to do, again, just to recap it, 3 to 5, that's all we're looking for, but identify those strengths and identify those perceived limitations. Then identify how you leverage those strengths and how you can build upon those limitations if they are actually limitations. So thank you again. I'm glad you watched, and I'm looking forward to working with you all. Later.